hopefully, yeah. Some of you will have been on the tour this morning, hopefully someone come this afternoon. So I'm Gareth Edwards, and I'm the Head of Knowledge and Understanding at the Royal Commission, which is embarrassing because it's a bit of a mouthful, but that means that I manage the part of the Commission, so there's a half of the Commission which is responsible for the sort of survey and research and the collecting and creation of information, but also the archive as well, so it's curation. And I'm an archivist by background. So with the talk today, the idea is to give you a sort of overview of the collections that we hold, but also to put them in some kind of context of what the Commission does as a whole and where it comes from. And there's two themes I want to bring out, really. One is what makes us unique. When I do these sort of introductions to our collection talks, usually, the biggest question at the end is, so what's the difference between you and the National Library? We are quite a different organisation, but as was pointed out, there's lots of scope for kind of synergies and for us to work together. But we are unique as well, so I want to bring that out. But that uniqueness, I think, also is another theme of the talk, which is continuity. Although we're 108 years old now, sort of around the same age as the National Library, you know, and the way that we do things might have changed, technology's changed, how we create and disseminate the records might have changed. There's a continuity to how we work, how we organise and make our records available, and I want to bring that out as well, because that's part of the uniqueness of the Commission. So what I'm going to do is give you a sort of bit of a historical background to the National Monuments Record and the Commission itself, how it came about, so you can understand where it comes from, and then an overview of the collections and a little bit about how we make them available. Okay? So we'll go back to the beginning, and that really the Royal Commission stems out of the first legislation enacted to protect national monuments in Great Britain, which was in 1882, I think the first act was. There was a follow-up act in 83 to strengthen it because it was a fairly weak act, and it appointed an investigator to go around and an inspector of ancient monuments. But it was soon realised, I mean, Britain actually, I should say, was quite behind the game in this, because a lot of European countries in the mid-19th century had started to legally protect their sort of heritage. But Britain lagged behind a bit. And it was realised that to protect, you know, to enact that legislation, you had to know what the heritage was and where it was, what the monuments were. You know, you needed some authoritative guide as to their location and their worth. And so there was a lot of clamour from academics and people interested in the historic environment to create a national inventory of sites. Again, Britain really lagged behind in that. I think the earliest European one was the Danes, who'd actually instituted a sort of inventory of their monuments in the late 18th century. And in fact, even colonially, there was one in India in the 1850s, inventorising ancient monuments, but Britain didn't have one at the time of the sort of acts to protect monuments, and it was only in 1908 where pressure built up and the Royal Commissions were established, first in Scotland, then England, then Wales, all in 1908. So we were around about the same, and it's all part of that growth of, you know, these national institutions that happened around the beginning of the 20th century, of which the National Library is also a part. And what that did was it set up Royal Commissions to create an inventory of the ancient monuments. And ancient and historical monuments, I've got to read this because I can never remember it, and constructions connected with or illustrative of the contemporary culture, civilization, and conditions of life of the people in Wales from the earliest times. So create an inventory, an authoritative inventory of the historic environment. And that, despite several iterations of the Royal Warrant, which has added certain things such as maritime archaeology to our remit, that's still the remit of the Commission. So it's to create an authoritative public inventory of monuments. That's archaeology, architecture, industrial archaeology, maritime archaeology, and they still do that. So how do they go about this? Well, appointed commissioners under Royal Warrant. This is the first august body of men. I say men, there weren't any women commissioners unfortunately at the time. There are now, thankfully. Not quite sure who these ladies are.
They'll be the wives.
Yeah, wags. They're commissioned wags. This slightly psychotic looking vicar there. And this obviously is Sir John Treece. Not Colonel Sanders, inventor of Kentucky Fried Chicken, as people have tried to make out. But of course that links our two organisations as well, because he was, fundamental in founding the National Library, and he was the first chairman of our commissions, and a local lad as well, incredible character from Pontellian. So what they set about creating inventories, and they did that first off through published county-based inventories. Okay, the first of which was Montgomeryshire in 1911. Now, it's interesting because this is, over 100 years old, but the way it sets out the site information is exactly the way we do it now, okay? And this is the continuity thing. And it's also, the uniqueness is that the sites come first with us, so it all starts with the site. But if you look here, this is Llanidloes without, so you've got, county, parish, you've got Ordnance Survey map sheet, you've got latitude and longitude, because this is before the national grid, although that's what we use now. Then you've got the name of a site, the site type, which is tumuli, here we are, and a brief description. Now, all those elements, in roughly the same way, are what we do now. Our inventory is exactly the same. And it's a key bit of how we do things. So that work carried on for the best part of a century. And the last published county inventory was Glamorgan, later Castles. They became a bit more focused on different site types as time went on. But so the large volume published county inventory finished in 2000, but still organised in much the same way. And in fact, although we don't publish these volumes anymore, we still publish. We publish on different subjects, more tightly focused subjects such as the slate industry. We've just done a big book on, for instance. The Archaeology of Uplands Gwent is a publication that's recently come out. But we don't publish this big sort of county-based inventory anymore, but we do publish our inventory. And that now is obviously done by the internet. And Covlane is the way that you can access our site records. Okay, so that and if you look at Covlane, you will see the same elements in that first published inventory are there as well. But you will also see Search Archive, and that's where the National Monuments record comes in, okay? So there's a continuity with the way we record and inventorise sites, but we've also got an archive growing. And so where does that archive come from? Well, as work went on to create these published inventories, first of all, it was commissioners just doing it, sending around questionnaires, looking at documentary, background records and compiling inventories. Then they started to employ surveyors and people to go out and do surveys. And of course, that work creates records, drawings, plans. This is just an example. This is from the 1920s. Leonard Monroe, one of the early commission investigators. Quite a nice picture of Dovecot there. So it's generating graphic records, generating photography as well. Example of the sort of architectural photography. This is quite a nice Tudor house in Montgomeryshire. So the creation of the inventory was building up a huge body of records, but this wasn't made available to the public. These were just the working records of the commission, okay? And they were kept in files like this. The Carnarvonshire parish files still survive. So this is how they ordered the records that would eventually go into an inventory. This is from 1946. The Carnarvonshire inventory was published in 1956, which gives you an idea about the length of time it took to compile them. In fact, I've just noticed a very unarchival steel paperclip there as well. And the way these are ordered is exactly the same way that the inventories are ordered, by geographically and then by site type. And in fact, when I come to talk about our collections now, you'll see a continuity here as well in the way that some of our main collections are ordered. But these were not public records. Well, they weren't available publicly. They weren't curated in public archives. They were just the working records of the commission. But that all changed in 1963. I should say, it wasn't just inventory work that was starting to create records as well. We were involved in excavations. You may recognise that building in the background there. It's the National Library. So this is a big excavation of Pendennis in the 1930s. And excavations, if you know anything about archaeological excavations, generate oodles of records. Photography. What I like about this photograph is that it's obviously high summer and really boiling hot, and they're still wearing tweeds. Old school, you see. So excavation work is building up records as well, but still not publicly available, not curated in a public archive. Sycharth Castle here is Oeglindo's Mott. We excavated that in 63, 62, 63, generated lots of graphic records, photographic records, but just kept as the working records of the Commission. But 63 is an important date because of the National Buildings Record, okay? And this is one of our key founding sort of collections. Apart from the records that we created, this is a large record created by another body, and it was key to founding the National Monuments Record as a public service. The National Buildings Record was started in 1940 at the height of the Blitz. I mean, it's incredible that during that time people were worried about heritage, but people were. And it was realised that we were going to lose a lot of quite important buildings through the agency of the Luftwaffe. So they set about either recording buildings, important buildings, or collecting architectural records that were already in existence to create a record of buildings that might be destroyed through enemy action. And that work carried on till well after the war. This is an example. So they created their own photography. This is an example of the sort of quality of architectural photography. This is Halton Hall, which is near Wrexham. Beautiful sort of Jacobean doorway there. So they created photographic records, and they collected existing photographic records as well. Some fairly early ones. This is from around the turn of the last century of quite an important Tudor house, which you might be familiar with in Conway. It looks very different now, it's been rendered, etc. And very early photography as well. This comes from the National Monuments Record. This is salt paper print from the mid-19th century. In fact, we have some wax paper negatives of around the same time as well, and they come from the National Buildings Record. So that National Buildings Record created a huge architectural archive, and it was realised by 1963 that really their work converged with the work of the Royal Commission, and there was no point in having two separate organisations. So the collections of the National Building Record were split amongst England, Scotland and Wales to be curated by the Royal Commissions. But that meant they needed a proper record service to make the stuff available and to curate it properly. So there was a new Royal Warrant in 63, and that's where the National Monuments Record dates from, saying that the Royal Commission's giving them the onus to create a records body to curate and make available records of the National Buildings Record and their own records as well. And that's where we date from, on paper at least. But really it wasn't until the late 70s, early 80s that all this stuff came to us. And during the time that was all coming, there was a lot more work happening outside of the inventories as well. And this is another big driver for creating records for the National Monuments Record, which is threat-based recording. Just an example here, you know, industrial heritage, incredibly important from the point of view of Welsh history. A lot of it was in the early 1970s just disappearing, it's been bulldozed off the face of the earth. So we went out and started responding to that and recording stuff, creating photographic and measured surveys, etc. This is a classic example of a sort of thing. This is obviously tinplate, very important industry in southwest Wales. This is works that was just derelict, you know, shortly before it was destroyed. So this is generating records as well. So by the end of the 70s, you've got all the National Buildings Record coming, you've got the great massive records built up through inventory work, and you've got this threat-based recording starting to generate in records. And another thing was added to that mix by that time, which was Ordnance Survey records. So the commissions had always supplied information to Ordnance Survey in order to depict monuments on their maps. Here you can see a well-known local one, Pendinas. Okay, and so the Ordnance Survey had an archaeological section, and they had a large sort of collection of records to do with archaeology. They were closed, and their records came to the various commissions as well, so they fed into the National Monuments Record. So by the end of the 70s, early 80s, you had our own records from inventories, you had excavation, you had the National Buildings Record, you had the threat-based sort of recording that we were doing, and you had the OS records, all feeding into this nascent National Archive and Information Service. And that was all working in concert with our inventory of sites, so our site-based recording. And it was at this time they started to employ, you know, information professionals to look after the stuff and make it available. But how did they make it available? Well, and again, this is an example of the kind of continuity of practice, really. When I started working at the Commission in 1993, this was still in use. This is before computerisation. So it was a card index. And if you look at the elements of that card index, it's a Caerphilly Castle, okay? You've got site name, you've got locational information, you know, parish, grid reference, map sheet, etc. You've got a brief description, all the things that are in the inventories, exactly the same. But the key change here is you've now got a record section as well. So it refers, you've got a site record that refers to an archive. So you've got, it's a fairly crappy sort of archival record, but it is an archival record. You've got, you know, Royal Commission files, manuscript, survey, drawing. You've got photos, stuff held elsewhere, what fieldworks happened, whether a photo or survey has been produced. One's been crossed out, I don't know what that means. But that site record relationship, that's key to how we work, okay? So you can search for a site, you can search for the records, the archive records which relate to that site. And that's really the starting point of the National Monuments Record as we know it today. Now, since then, obviously, you know, things have been computerised, we've got a lot more sophisticated, and we've collected a lot more records, added records. So where we're at now, really, on coming to the library site, okay, we reckon we've got about 1.5 million photographic images, which is, you know, one of the sort of primary photographic archives of Wales, really. Lots of drawings, 500,000 pages of text. This is all through sampling, some of which was done by you many years ago. Yeah, well, certainly it's been updated. Lots of archive maps, you know, I'll talk about maps later on. And obviously the big growth area is digital records, and I'll do a bit about digital records. And, you know, if you've been on the tour or coming on the tour, you'll see our stores, but that's about 180 cubic metres in shelving and plan presses. So it's a major national collection. But the key thing is, it's accessed via the sites, and you know, the other unique thing is we're not just collecting records, we're creating records as well. So we're creating records about the site and archive records to do with the site, and that's the key thing about the National Monuments Record. So with that kind of background in mind as to where we come from and you know how we work, I'll just talk about the sort of collections we have that we've added since then. Okay, the collections. And you may have seen some examples in the library if you came on the tour earlier on and in our stores, but come this afternoon and you'll see some more. Okay, so there's two types of record really in the National Monuments Record. You know, there's archives proper, right, i.e. collections that we've received, produced through a process, that we curate through a process, but we've actually got things that are collections that we create as well. And the big sort of general collection is the site files. So, and you remember the working files, those Carnarvonshire inventory files that I showed you earlier on, how they were ordered, although they weren't set up as public records. Well, these work in exactly the same way. So they're geographically ordered and site type ordered, and they're actually on the shelf in that order as well. So you can search geographically and by map based criteria just on the records, even if they're not catalogued. And not everything in this collection, because it's a massive collection, is catalogued at item level, but it's still available geographically. So if you're interested in, you know, domestic records in that map sheet of Cardiganshire, we can give you that file and you can help yourself, you know. But so these files, and they're as I say, they're a collection, they're not an archive. I mean, I suppose you could argue they're an archive now in that we don't really add to them anymore, because everything we get of that nature tends to be digital. So they might have these kind of little site surveys that our investigators do. Well, this is all done entirely digitally now. Okay, so this is a site you may be familiar with, the Talbot Hotel in Tregaron. Little floor plan, site description, some photography, maybe an annotated extract, etc. That's the sort of thing you'll find in the site files. That might have been done by one of our architectural investigators as a response to you know, a threatened buildings inquiry or something like that. But it's not just the stuff that our investigators produce you'll find in these files. As I say, they're a collection. The prints from the National Buildings Record are also in these files, although the obviously the negatives are curated as a separate collection. The prints will be in these files as well. I'm not sure we would have done that now, but that's how it happened in the past. And other sort of individual items that will have been donated will be in there as well. Lots of individual photographs, odd little extracts, that type of thing go in those site files. One of the big things you'll find in site files is old postcards, because they're an absolutely fantastic record of the historic environment. Okay, so you've got one here, Haverfordwest, right? Now obviously we've got that because of the castle, so there's a view of the castle in the 1920s. I know this, I'll tell you the story. I know this is the 1920s, right, because I used to have circa 1900, that's what most people do with our photographs, don't they? Circa 1900, right? And we had a party from the Aberystwyth Postcard Society who came to see us, and the lady said, oh no, this is a judge's postcard, I know that reference number, that means it's from the 1920s. She knows more about postcards than I do, so I've updated that. But anyway, you know, as a record of the historic environment, they're brilliant because you've got the castle, okay, that's a monument, but you know, Haverfordwest, incredibly important medieval town, a lot of which, especially on the waterfront, has changed now. So you've got a record of that townscape, which has vanished, but added to that, you've also got some river traffic here. Now, you know, we're interested in transport, we're interested in industrial history, we're interested in maritime history. That could be a local, you know, vessel type, we don't know. So in that one little postcard, you've got an incredible record of the historic environment there. So you'll find that sort of stuff in site files. Well, we're also, you know, a bit different from other archives in that we're an information service. So we will not just hold original stuff, we will copy stuff and hold them as well. And you might find sort of copied things that have been lent to us. In the past, they would have been copied photographically. Now we'll obviously digitise them. So this is an example of a sketch that was lent to us that we would have photographed, and that'll be in there from the 18th century. So that big general collection is a sort of starting point for a lot of people doing research, okay? We've also got a general drawings collection. Graphic records are incredibly important to us. And you know, we curate individual archives as well, but we do have a big general collection that we add to, either with our own drawings or things that have been donated to us. One of the things that Royal Commissions specialise in is reconstruction and cutaway drawings. Okay, this is Llandelo Talabont Church, which actually is physically reconstructed now in St Faggan, so it's been moved. But it's incredibly important because it had lots of surviving sort of early Tudor wall paintings, pre-Reformation wall paintings in it. Okay, but that style of cutaway drawing is one of the specialities of the Commission. And again, as I'll show you, there's a certain continuity about how we do things. We might do things in a new way now, but there's a continuity, which I'll show you later. The important thing to remember about these sort of things is that they're not just imaginative reconstructions, they're based on measured survey. So that three-dimensional thing is based on someone going out, you know, measuring it with a proper accurate survey. Okay? It might be a bit more imaginative, again based on archaeological evidence. This is Hen Gaia, this is a Bow Street, Iron Age hill fort. So you'll find that kind of thing. But it's not just pretty stuff we have in that drawings collection. That's a pretty unprepossessing survey plot. So it'll be archaeological work as well. But the thing about this is, it's a digital survey. It's from 1997. Now that's a hard copy printout in our collection. We wouldn't hold that in hard copy now. That will all be held digitally. But you know, this is 97, so it's on the cusp of holding things in paper form before we were gearing up to take digital archives. And as well as having general collections, as I say, we have archives that come from specific bodies of work. That specific body of work might be our own work. So we do a lot of focused projects on different areas of heritage. One of the big ones over the last 20 years has been recording nonconformist places of worship in Wales, which, as you will know, are incredibly important from the point of view of Welsh heritage and culture, and are disappearing at a rate of knots. And a lot of that was done through volunteer work, working with Capel, Welsh Chapel Society, who went out, you know, with volunteers and photographed chapels, both in exteriors and interiors, and we held the resulting photographic surveys as an archive in its own right. Interestingly enough, again, that's in 1997. I think if we'd have done this 10 years later, you know, it would all been digital, and it would be much better because we wouldn't have to digitise it, and we could make it directly available to the public. But there we are. So it just missed the boat there. But so our recording might be through volunteers, but it also be augmented by our own work as well, photographic work. I mean, this is a single example of why recording stuff is important as well, because as you know, that chapel is now burnt to the ground and has been expunged. And also through measured survey as well. So this is one in Bethesda from that whole chapel's survey archive. So it's an important part of our work to go out to do targeted survey work, and that will often could be a project of several, tens of years, and will be curated as a single archive. But it's not just our own records that we're curating as archives as well. We're placing a deposit under the Public Records Act, and in fact that's how we can hold our own records, because they're public records. They're created by a public body, ourselves, and under the 20 years rule they need to go to a place of public place deposit, which we are, so we can hold our own records, but we also then act as the archive for other public bodies creating records of the historic environment. One of the big ones, of course, is CADU. Now we take CADU's administrative files, we select those, and in fact some of you would have seen the sort of massive collection of admin files that we've got from CADU. Going back, well, I say they're from CADU, they're actually from the Ministry of Works, so they date back to about 1908, even though CADU was still using them in the 1990s. So we hold that sort of stuff, but we also hold their, and that's about the protection of monuments, but they also have what are called guardianship monuments, i.e. monuments that are in their direct care, and they have a big, architectural sort of section with a drawing office that looks after them, and we take the records that they have under the 20-year rule, and again, they go right back to the Ministry of Works. This is a fairly early one, quite a nice drawing of Castle House in Monmouth. But it's not, obviously CADU are directly interested in ancient monuments or historic monuments, but we also take records from public bodies where they have, records relating to monuments, even though that's not their particular interest. The Public Service Agency obviously looked after government buildings. They had a big collection of, as well as, they might have a wiring diagram of a job centre in Tongapandi or something, which is, we have to weed that collection, to be honest. But they also had some very early, 20th century drawings of public buildings, which are fantastic, beautiful. And so we hold those sort of things as well. So we will select stuff that are relevant to our collections from other bodies. This is the Cardiff Inland Revenue and County Court Office, undated, but early 20th century, circa 1900 is what you have to do. Okay. It might be that actually it's the sort of public body that you wouldn't think would have stuff of relevance to our collection, but we will still take them if they are relevant. One of the great ones is the Central Office of Information. Central Office of Information was the government department that was responsible for kind of marketing and advertising for the government. They, all the public information films like Charlie Says and how the Green Cross Code and all that. That was all done by the Central Office of Information. But they also produced, promotional material for cities and for tourist guidebooks. Now, a lot of this collection is photographs of castles and bridges and coal mines and things, which is obviously really important to us, but they have some fantastic stuff of street scenes of places like Cardiff in the late 70s and early 80s. And the great thing about them is that they're peopled as well. So, take this now, this is the Golden Cross in Bute Street in 1979. That's a fantastic record of a pub interior. That's a world that's disappeared. This is in my living memory, but that's a world that's gone. A lot of those buildings have disappeared or had their guts ripped out. But it's also great because it shows people in there as well. It's not, a lot of our records will record a building, but it's quite dry. You're recording it for technical purposes, but to show them in use is fantastic. So I think records like this are great to add to our collections. I love this photograph. I think she's got some sort of job centre out of it for looking for labourers there, so we're having a laugh on a Friday afternoon or something. But again, it's the historic environment. This is gone. It's a few years old, but it's gone. Academic collections, another big important part of our work, taking stuff from universities, etc. One of the big ones was the Welsh School of Architecture, who taught architectural illustration from, I think this from the late 50s up until the sort of 80s. They don't teach it anymore, it's all done by AutoCAD. But that built up, and students had to do kind of exhibition at the end of the year. That built up a massive collection of really high quality architectural illustration that they wanted to get rid of. They had to find a home for because they no longer teach the course, they didn't have the space for it. So we were more than happy to take it. And I think there's about, well, 3,000 to 4,000 drawings, mainly of Welsh sites, because obviously it's the Welsh School of Architecture, though not exclusively Welsh sites. I think it's about 78% Welsh sites. There's things like, you know, high status kind of public buildings. This Tredegar Park is Newport, isn't it? You know, you can see the quality of the illustration, but also, you know, vernacular architecture as well. This is St George's near St Fagans. This is that's actually a farmhouse built out of part of Castle, so it's quite an important site. But you know, incredibly detailed, quality architectural drawings. So working with universities who do a lot of research, etc., is a big source for us. We also take commercial architectural records as well, where we're offered them by architectural practices. One of the nicest ones, I mean, not all of them are great, you know, and we've been very selective now because architectural practices produce oodles of drawings, but one of the nicest ones is Herbert L. North. North and Padmore were architectural practice in Llanfairfechan in North Wales. He's actually famous as a sort of arts and crafts architect. In fact, we published a book on him. And we were offered some of his original drawings. You know, he not only undertook public sort of tenders, but you know, he was known for his domestic architecture. This is classic sort of style, you know, of his buildings. And you can see that, you can still see that up in North Wales today. So that's, you know, those kind of quality architectural illustrations are really important. We also buy records, okay? Not very often, but a lot of our work now is funded through making bids for public funds. This was funded through the HLF. So Falkenhilde, we're not particularly interested in art collections. That's not what we're about. But where an art collection captures something which is important to us, we will hold it. Falkenhilde is an artist and illustrator based in Blaenau-Ffestiniog, and he's done loads to record, he's very interested in industrial archaeology, loads to record the slate industry around where he lives. And he was selling his kind of life's collection several years ago, and we made a Heritage Lottery Fund bid to buy it, which we have done, and digitise it. They're fantastic, you know, he really captures the kind of atmosphere. But he's not just an artist, he's an illustrator as well. You know, he's got a fine technical eye. So this is a kind of reconstruction. These are estate workshops up in North Wales, Parkland and Clevedon, big estate. You know, so it's, you know, this is a fantastic record. So we will buy records. Not just graphic records. I mean, we've bought photographic records. Photographic records are really important to us, as is industrial archaeology. This is one of the, one of my favourite kind of industrial records, John Cornwall, which we bought. John Cornwall was a professional photographer, but he worked for the National Coal Board, and he did a lot to record coal mines while they were still working on the eve of their destruction, really. So in the late 70s, early 80s. But again, and this is key, they're also people. So they're not someone going down to record a closed coal mine once it's shut. This shows people working. I mean, this is Mardi 75. This is the last pit to close in the Rhondda, I think. So incredibly important. But it shows a collier there working in the chocks. It's just a fantastic record of an industry with people in it. So buying collections is quite important, I think, where we can afford it, where we can get funding. It's an exceptional collection. But also, individuals with an interest are big donors to the National Monuments Record. You know, either their research or just through a personal interest, they might have created a collection of photography, etc. That they haven't set out to create an important record of the historic environment. They're indulging their interest, but what they're left with is a really important collection. And one of the classics of that is the Rokeby collection. Now, this isn't just for Wales, it covers the whole of the UK. Well, certainly Scotland, England and Wales anyway. The Reverend and it's been divided up between the various nations. But the Reverend Rokeby was a railway enthusiast. And when I say enthusiast, I mean he was really enthusiastic, right? he collected a photograph or postcard or took a photograph of every single halt and station in mainland Britain, right? That's massive, but the important thing about it as well is it was all before the beaching cuts. So he's created a record of a disappeared rail network, right? This, do you know Llanfarion at all? You won't recognise where this is, probably. So that's the cycle path. Well, it's a sort of back road of those houses, and it runs out into the cycle path now. I think down here is where the sort of village hall is, community centre is. So, Llanfystyd Road Station, all gone, all trace of it expunged. And this covers the whole of Wales. So you imagine all those little branch lines that disappeared. And as you can see, a lot of the kind of buildings are fairly ephemeral. You have wooden buildings and tin buildings. There's no trace of them. So this kind of personal interest applies to something like transport history, industrial archaeology, whatever. It's really important for us to hold and make available. One of the classics of this, of someone with a personal interest, and it's a fantastic collection. We did have a sample of it out earlier on for people on the tour. Is REK. Now, I hesitate to use the word amateur because he was anything but amateur, but he didn't do it for a living. I think he just worked in an office, I think. But he was really interested in, he was a sort of old-style antiquarian, really. And from being a schoolboy in the 1930s up until the end of the 1980s, he went on a series of walks around Wales and the borders and made just meticulous notes on the antiquities that he saw. And he was a very good draftsman as well. And he would walk monuments to measure them and make meticulous plans of them as well. He was also quite a good draftsman. So there's some beautiful illustrations there. This is St Bride's Church. I mean, the interesting thing as well is in that you can see his handwriting up there. This is when he's a schoolboy, and then this is sort of 30 years later. It gets increasingly crabbed, his sort of handwriting. But this is an important record as well because it looks nice, but it's also, he noted a lot of things that no one else noted and that have since disappeared. I'd like to get this digitised as a kind of funded project, and maybe transcribed as well, and maybe map his walks on a GIS or something like that, which I think would be a great project to look at. On a sort of more prosaic note, but no less important, the big growth area for the National Monuments Records is Development Control Archives. Okay, so this is archaeological work or architectural work coming from planning, the planning process. Often, well, I don't know, Tesco's want to build a car park. If it's somewhere archaeologically sensitive, as part of planning permission, they would be expected to pay for an archaeological survey. That produces records, okay? We hold those records. So often it's just what they call grey literature, just a report, but it might be a small archive as well. And that's a real growth area, both in terms of sort of reports and archives and photographic work as well. So if it's a listed building and, as part of the permission to do work on that listed building might be you have to make a photographic record. We'll take those as well. This is Chapel Bay Fort, which is being conserved. Again, planning permission said you've got to make a full photographic record and deposit that with the National Monuments Record. So this is a big growth area for our collections, really. There's some fantastic records. They're not always the prettiest of records, but they're important. And that really brings me on to archaeological archives, a lot of which is driven by the planning process, but not always. It might just be research. This is a sort of selection of stuff from Park Bryn Cegin, which is sort of Iron Age settlement, quite an important one up in North Wales. And this is almost exclusively digital now. So the sort of emphasis of our work is shifting really onto digital records, and that goes for our own archaeological and architectural survey as well. This is generating huge amounts of records that we have to curate and make available, and that's asking questions of how we do that, how we sustain it, etc. And we are looking at developing our digital archiving facilities. We've gone a certain way down that line, but we're working towards becoming a sort of trusted digital repository eventually. But work like that just generates masses of records, and people say, what's your collecting policy, how do you go out and make sure that people are depositing with you, etc. We don't have to, people are falling over themselves to deposit this stuff with us because there's nowhere else to put it. but we see it as a really important part of our role to give a home to this and make it available. And one of the things we're doing as well, which is a bit different to traditional archive, is it's almost records management outside of the organisation. So that is to talk to contractors, people working in the archaeological world, producing guidelines and making sure that they're producing records in the right format, that it's described in the right way with the right metadata, and that it's formatted so that we can ingest it sustainably, because we've got a finite resource of staff. So a lot of my work is now going out and talking to people and training people on how to configure these archives, even before the work starts, so they're using the right formats of records, etc. And that's, again, a bit different to traditional archive, who sort of wait for it, it's a done deal. We're going out there and sort of influencing how records are created. Increasingly important. Big area, again, of our work, aerial photographs. You've seen some examples on the tour, or you will do if you come after lunch. We've got several huge collections, which are going to get bigger, but one of which comes from the Royal Air Force. Now, aerial photographs are an incredible record of the historic environment for several reasons, which I'll go into, but they're also records at a particular time. They can capture historic moments as well. And this is a great example of that. This is 1946. RAF did a big survey. They had a bit of spare capacity in 1946, as you'll imagine, and they did a massive survey of the British Isles, aerial photographic survey. But this is Milford Haven, very important, obviously military port. And these shapes you can see here are naval ships waiting to be broken up. So they're hulk there, the end of the war, massive overcapacity. So it's captured that moment in time, right at the end of the war. It's an incredible photograph, really. But they're a fantastic research archive as far as sort of development and landscape and growth is concerned as well. We've also got a big collection from the Ordnance Survey. Ordnance Survey produced a lot of air photo mapping, obviously to help with their production of maps. This is, again, same area, Pembroke Dock, 2001. You can see here, that star-shaped object is a sort of mid-19th century, late 19th century defensible barracks, part of the Palmerstonian defences of the British Isles. But you can see urban development has encroached upon it. So you've got houses going right up to its ditch there, and the golf course as well. So where the French failed, golf has succeeded. But you can look at different epochs then of aerial photography, and you can really see. I think we've got several views of Aberystwyth up in the out for people doing the tour. It really shows you how you develop and change over the years as landscape. So they're important from that aspect as well. Recognise that building? One of the great collections we've got is the Aerofilms collection, which was a commercial aerial photographic archive, started in 1919. So really, really early photography by ex-First World War flyers. It was a commercial archive that was being sold. HLF project to buy it with ourselves, Scotland and England, and to conserve it and digitise it as well. Some fantastic early views of Wales, but I included this for obvious reasons. The interesting thing here is, where the car park is now, you can see allotments, okay? Now, I did think, with it being 1947, that's probably the dig for victory thing, that they turned it into allotments during the war and it was still there. But later on I found in 1932 a view of the National Library from the same collection, and there are even more allotments then. And it turns out that apparently part of the perks of working for the National Library was you got an allotment.
There was a librarian's garden, I was told.
Right.
The librarian got all the fresh veg.
It's incredible. Well, I had heard that the staff had them, and that this is probably the librarian's bit there, and this is probably everyone else's. I don't know, but that they eventually all disappeared, and the last bit remaining was the librarian. I don't think he worked it himself. I think other people did it for him. So, but it's a fantastic bit of detail captured in an aerial photograph, and also again the urban development. If we go back, look at the university there in 1947. The swimming pool's still there, isn't it? I've run around that track a few times. That building's still there, and then there's nothing else. It's fantastic. So that's a great collection. We also do our own aerial photography. Toby Driver, an archaeologist who works with us, does a lot of aerial photography. And there's several reasons for that. A lot of what we do is monitoring scheduled ancient monuments, so that the monuments that CADU legally protect have to be monitored. It might be for agricultural kind of reasons, is the farmer ploughing it, etc. You can obviously see, outside of the scheduled area, probably there's, erosion there. But also things like sea coast, and erosion, things have to be monitored because they're disappearing, especially promontory forts, which by their nature are on the coast. So quite a nice one, that's Pennlleen, that is there. So it's falling into the sea, but it probably has been for many centuries. But so Toby does a programme where he flies scheduled nature monuments, so that, because obviously visiting every single one on the ground is pretty impossible for CADU. So this is part of our work, and then obviously making those records, curating, making those records available. But also, and this is another key thing for aerial photography and why it's important for archaeology, is that it's great for finding hidden archaeology and making discoveries. And Toby often does that in areas, especially when, if we've had a hot summer, he'll go up and look for parch marks. And this does turn up new information, okay? That's great, that's working just about right. So this was found in 2006 by Toby, Llwydvain. Now originally I said Llwydvain medieval church because we thought it was a lost Norman church, because the shape conforms to that. But actually there's since been an excavation. I think there was a Welsh kind of version of the Time Team, I can't remember what it's called, but they did an excavation, I'll tell you that. And it turns out it's probably Roman. They found late Roman coins, etc., pottery. So it's possibly a Roman temple. And that's all through buried walls during a dry spell, meaning the vegetation parches and you get the kind of palimpsest of its foundations. So it's incredibly important from that point of view, aerial photography. Okay, maps. That's a big part of our collection. That you were talking earlier on about how we can work together, and I think one of the areas is the geographical referencing of material. But also, people had ideas when we were on the tour earlier on about how we hold a lot of published Ordnance Survey maps. They're not archived as such, but we keep them for reference purposes. They take up space. They probably exactly replicate the published maps that you have. So maybe that's somewhere where we could look at the space saving, cost saving by, keeping a set, flogging off a set, and both using a set for reference purposes. Possibly, these are things we're thinking about. But aside from the published maps, we have a lot of unique archive maps as well. And this is a fantastic example. These are Ordnance Survey master copies. So this is a drawn map from the 1905 resurvey of the first edition in 1886. And the interesting thing about this is they didn't just draw a new map from scratch. They printed the old one in blue. I'll zoom in. Can you see those blue lines there? Is that visible where you are? Okay, so this is a detail from the middle here of this map, Maesecrygau there, which is a large house in Carmarthenshire. Okay, so they print the old map in blue, do the resurvey, then where nothing had changed, they could just draw over the old blue lines, so they didn't have to draw it from scratch, and just draw in the new stuff. Then they'd photograph it using a process which didn't show blue, and you had a new map without drawing it all from scratch. But this shows what then you've got as a record. Between 1886 and 1905, I suspect there was probably a fire at Maesecrygau Hall because the entire wing of buildings had disappeared. The garden plantings changed, they've lost an avenue of trees. And this is all captured in that one process. So these are really fantastic archive maps. Unfortunately, I think it was Ordnance Survey were throwing them out, and they threw away most of Meirionnydd before we got to them. But we've got the rest of Wales. So it's an example of the sort of, detail of map collections that we hold. So really it's an overview of our collections and some of the highlights. But it gives you an idea of the breadth of the collections and the areas that we either create records in or take records from. But the thing to remember about those, they are all geographically referenced. I'll explain how that works in a minute. But before I do, digital records, this is the big new area for us, obviously, over the last sort of 10, 15 years. And that's not just in the records that we hold, but how they're created as well. So now, the archaeological survey that we take in is either being produced by ourselves or by, outside bodies. And now this is all done exclusively digitally. So this is a plan, we'd hold that digitally from an excavation. This is work that we've done on Scromer Island recently. This is done through a GPS survey, so using GPS to, instead of doing a hand measured survey, use GPS. There's a GPS station there giving you a three-dimensional plan of this trench. And you know, that's producing a lot of data that needs to be held, as well as the kind of mediated output data as well. So we've got to think about how we're going to handle that. And actually, as far as Scone is concerned, the site to excavate was identified through Lidar. Lidar is a sort of growth area for us as well, which uses sort of lasers from a plane, lasers, you know, that bounce back to give you height details, and you can actually strip away. So you've got Caerau Hillfort there, Ely in Cardiff, okay? It's got, you know, estates around it, etc. Well, this is a sort of three-dimensional model created from the Lidar data. And you can actually drape over photography, you can make that into a reconstruction, you can fly through it, turn it around, etc. But as you'll appreciate, the amount of data that goes to create that through a Lidar survey is enormous. So we've got to think about how we're going to curate that, and then how we're going to make the resulting kind of models available as well. Another technique for that is photogrammetry, done from a plane with lots and lots and lots of photographs that allows you to do a three. I mean, you can't see this, but you can take that. That's actually a model. It's not just a photograph. That's a model made up of thousands of photographs. Structure from motion, they call it. Photogrammetric survey, and you can take that, turn it round, and look through it, understand how it fits together. It's another hill fort kind of went. So you can imagine the thousands of individual photographs that's creating. Again, we've got to look after that stuff and make it available. I talked about the reconstruction drawings we used to do. We still do that. Again, continuity. It's a new way of doing it, you know, but the cutaway and the kind of the phased idea of building, so you can understand how old they are. It's exactly what we do now with digital recreations. Now this is Denby Town Hall. This is quite a simple old one that we've done. They're now a lot more sophisticated, you know, fly-throughs and sort of you can texture them, etc. I use this one because it's not too long and it's a small file, so I can show you. So that we can show phases of building, so 1580s, 1780s. You can see the structure from all angles. This would have been done through a measured survey and taking that survey and turning it into a three-dimensional object, a three-dimensional digital object. And you can also then fly through and see the interiors as well, a bit like you could do with cutaways, but you know, in a much more animated way. I'll just wait till it flies through the front door. Should do in a minute. There we go. So as you can see, you know, there is a continuity of how we do things, but it's just expanded and improved through the use of technology. I'll move on because there's also, you know, you can do the same thing with, you know, industrial sites as well. This is Pontycavnau, very important bridge, Merthyr Tydfil, part of the iron making network there. So this took, I think, limestone down to the kilns, to the furnaces from the quarries above Merthyr Tydfil in Gurnos, and also water to work the water wheel that worked the blast furnace. I think Pontycavnau, that means the bridge of troughs, doesn't it? Pontycavnau. So there we go. So that's the kind of thing we're doing now. It's still using measured survey. It's still reconstructing things, but it's just doing it in a more modern way. And again, we've got to work out ways how we're going to deliver that and also curate the vast amount of data that goes into creating it. So I'll just finish now, I've got 5 minutes, on accessing the collections. Now, as I said, the unique thing about our collections is that it's site. The site comes first. And this is the important thing with how we structure our data. So you've got an archive catalogue here, and that's an archive catalogue like any archive catalogue. I won't go into the detail, but it's ISAG compliant, so it follows cataloguing standards, and it refers to, you know, a record. But it's also linked to our site data. Now I showed you that published inventory of sites, I showed you that index card. Well, that index card is now that, which is a database of sites. Still got exactly the same elements actually as the published inventory from 1908, a bit more expanded, a bit more in depth. But every record that we catalogue, and 99% of our records relate to a site, can be related to a site in our site database. Or every site that we record has many, many records in our archive. So we're using the National Inventory of Sites basically as an index to our collections. Taken together, we can then output that directly, and this is output directly onto the internet using web services into Covling, which is our web access system. So this is now our published inventory online, but it's also our archive online as well. And if I zoom in closer to this bit here, you can see search site records. So you can search our inventory of sites, you can search archive, you can look at the related archive records, or you can just search the archives in their own right. Or you can search an archive, find a record, then want to look at the site data about the site that that record refers to, and look back the other way. So you can look at it from all angles. We can also draw out themes and things and make that available in galleries. And you'll see here as well, Covling mapping. We can actually then make all that information, because it's related to a site and that site has a geographical reference, we can make that available on a map front end. So this is that Park Bryn Keggin archive I told you about. That's where it is. You can search a map, find something you're interested in, click on it, and then that will give you all the information that's in the site and the archive database as well. And this is now how we're working. It's all delivered directly to people through a geographical front end. So I'll just finish off. We've also then got a browsable specialist library that works alongside that, so people, when they're accessing records in our reading room, of which this is a picture, can actually use, take books off the shelf as well, which are directly related to the sort of collections we hold. And that's an important part of our work, that this sort of browsable specialist library as well can be viewed alongside our archive records. We run a full remote inquiry service, so people from all over the world are using us. Model makers in Australia are asking for plans of castles, to make accurate scale models, that sort of thing. Television companies, academics, people doing commercial work in the archaeological field, they all use us. And we also have a full sort of program of engagement and outreach events, such as exhibitions, talks, etc., to make this stuff available and to promote it, and also to generate information as well. Because one of the important things about this service is that we're not just making stuff available; it generates records for us. And I think that's another key thing. The way collections are developing is that our audience are also our creators now. I think that's another important thing that we can think about between ourselves and the National Library. So, bang on time. That's it. Thank you very much. And I'll see some of you perhaps this afternoon on the talk.